Welcome to the Terrible Podcast with your hosts from SteelersDepot.com, where you can find all your latest and greatest Steelers news. It's Dave Bryan and Alex Kozora, always lit, talking Steelers. And now, here's Dave and Alex.
Welcome to the Terrible Podcast, Season 9, Episode 80. He's Dave Bryan. I'm Alex Kozora, SteelersDepot.com. Thank you for tuning in this Wednesday, this chilly Wednesday if you're in Western PA, really anywhere outside of Dave in Vegas. It's pretty cold. But Dave, how are you hanging out there in, 50-degree Vegas weather?
Yeah, I think it was like 60 yesterday.
Oh,
I think it's going to be like 61 or 62 today. Yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous. A little crisp in the morning the way I like it, and then kind of warms up a little bit. So yeah, I don't envy. I've never have understood why anybody would want to live anywhere with it. To go outside, they have to work to even to get to their get in their car, get their car out of the driveway or whatnot. But I guess it's all what you know.
I'm one of them. Literally, when it gets this cold, the McLuhan's doors freeze shut, and you have to pour water, like lukewarm water, on them to unfreeze them. I actually had to take like WD-40 and spray it on the seal just so it doesn't freeze up. But I am staying comfortably indoors the next 2 days, and I advise everyone else in Pittsburgh to do the same. Got a really good show today. One thing I want to mention before we get into some of our Steelers talk, Chris Hoke, obviously former Steelers nose tackle, still covers the team today. We have an interview with him later on in the show. Really excited to have him back on. Some terrific insight from him, and to get his thoughts on Tomlin, the Pittsburgh situation, and some thoughts on the Super Bowl in his time, being a guy that could say he played in 3 Super Bowls and won 2 of them. So look for that a little bit later on in the show. But Dave, let's start with some Steelers news, and there's not a whole lot going on this week, so nothing earth-shattering. But as was kind of assumed before, and now I think really reported by the Post-Gazette yesterday, the team hasn't made it official, but it seems to be all but that. Keith Butler will replace Joey Porter as the outside linebackers coach. So again, not a surprise because it was teased before, but an in-house move to replace Porter.
Yeah, and look, I don't think officially know what's going to happen with a guy like, say, Kevin Green with the Jets. I don't think they've set their coaching staff as of yet. You would think that's going to happen pretty soon, but regardless, it doesn't sound like the Steelers care what's going to happen over there. I really wish, and look, I understand in today's NFL, especially when you're talking about the Steelers, the base 3-4, the outside linebackers really function more as kind of, I guess, defensive ends nowadays. But why not have people that are more specialized in that? And I understand Carl Dunbar might end up working with those guys a little bit more than he has in the past or whatnot. But it's always good to, the more eyes and the more coaching that you can get on a player, I think personally, the better. We've had all this talk about Keith Butler. Is he? How much of a defensive coordinator is he? Is he just a figurehead? Is it really Mike Tomlin calling the shots more than what we think? We don't really know. I'm not a fan of this. I understand why it's probably going this direction here. But yeah, I'm kind of disappointed. I got to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's just kind of weird, and I don't want to say hypocritical, but you look at the secondary, and they're trying to delegate that role and to specialize it by having Terrell Austin going to work with either the safeties or the corners, and Tom Bradley work with the other group. But at linebacker, it's now Butler's wearing multiple hats. They don't have a specific guy just for the outside linebackers, a really important and vital position to this defense. Now, can Butler do the job? Sure. I mean, he was a great linebackers coach. I know I've been super critical of him as a defensive coordinator, but I recognize he was one of the better linebackers coach in football during his long time in that position under Dick LeBeau, under the Steelers team. So I think he'll do a good job. He's molded guys like Harrison and Woodley and Lawrence Timmons before, so I have no qualms about his capability of doing the job there. And I do wonder, though, how exactly it's going to work, because you read the Post-Gazette article and they talk about, well, Carl Dunbar was working with the outside linebackers because in sub they basically function as ends, and Butler will only work with these guys in base. But how does that work in practice, literally in practice, when they're going through drills in camp or during the regular season? Who's taking the outside linebackers through their drills? When you break up for position groups in meetings, who's the outside linebackers going to? Are they going to Butler? Are they going to Dunbar? Are they going to Olszewski? I don't really know. So I guess you could say in theory, Butler will have a limited impact on them because of the role Dunbar plays, but in practice, someone has to coach these guys. I assume it's going to be Butler, but I don't really know how that's going to work, and that has me a little confused.
Yeah, who's handling the in-practice corrections?
Right, yeah. I have no idea. I mean, is it Dunbar? Is it Butler? Is it Tomlin? I have no idea.
And when they break up into the meeting rooms, and right. all like that, and they're going over tape, are both Dunbar and Keith Butler in there?
Right, because Dunbar can't work with them during practice. Dunbar's on another part of the field, and he's working with the D lineman.
Right, so there's dynamics there that you just don't, that obviously we don't know how they're going to be worked out. I mean, there's going to be a plan in place, you would assume, but like I said, I'm not a fan of it. And just because they probably play in defensive end a little bit more than, say, a traditional 3-4, you can still have a guy like Kevin Green showing them how to counter and how to get after and rush the quarterback and set the edge and all those things that go along with that. I would like to have one guy over that position group. That way the communication's there.
Sure.
And the kind of the chain of commands there. But look, can it work the way that it looks like they're going to go about doing it? Sure, I guess so. We'll see, but you can bet your bottom dollar that if there's any kind of problems, it's going to be and the defense not playing up to snuff, if you will. It's going to be easy to go back to and point to, and if it's the outside linebackers that aren't producing maybe like they should be, then it's going to be easy to go back to, well, see, there you go. They don't have a true linebacker or outside linebackers coach there.
Right, because, as much as Dunbar can teach these guys about pass rushing, and I like Carl Dunbar, I thought he was a really good hire last year. The way the D-line plays, the way the linebackers play, they're differently. They're just different. I know the linebackers dropped less this year. They dropped about 20% of the time, which was a pretty big reduction from last year. But still, the linebackers, they're line off ball, they're playing in the 4-3 front, they're stunting, they're blitzing differently, they're still dropping into coverage, again, 20% of the time. They're being used differently than the defensive line, and I want to make sure they're getting coached to do the things that they have to do that's separate from the D-line. But like you said, I guess we'll find out how that works out. In terms of roster moves, just one, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but one minor roster move was made this week. Trey Johnson, rookie UDFA from Villanova last year. I think he dislocated his shoulder, had some sort of shoulder injury in, I think, the spring of last year. He was officially released this week, so a pretty minor move there, but a guy that I like coming out, a guy that Tom Bradley seemed to like coming out, got hurt, unfortunately. We interviewed him last year and had a really good discussion with him, so it's a little bittersweet to see him go, but that's the one roster move the Steelers made this week.
Yeah, and I would say it was a surprise. I was surprised to see his name on the sheet. The other night, waived from IR. Now we don't know. I mean, look, obviously he was waived without a settlement there, according to the official transaction sheet, and he had shoulder surgery. Remember, this is a guy that didn't even take part, I don't believe, in the conditioning run back in when they reported to training camp because shoulder injury. I think that he suffered somewhere during OTAs or whatnot, but ended up got waived injured. Then cleared waivers, landed on the IR, stayed their entire rookie season. Obviously, shoulder surgery had taken place. A guy that we kind of thought, or at least I kind of thought, that, hey, interesting to see what this kid can do out of Villanova in year two, at least through the off season on into training camp. So I was kind of looking forward to, based on what limited stuff I had seen on tape on him on college, I'm looking forward to seeing what may transpire with him, especially being as he plays the cornerback position. But all for naught. Is it the end of the world that he was waived? No, but I certainly didn't see it coming.
Me neither, but if you want to talk about of guys on the roster today, and obviously more names will be added to the mix during free agency and especially after the draft, but of corners that are kind of interesting now, Herb Waters was the guy I profiled last week in terms of my future series, was signed to the practice squad, I think, in late October. He was kind of the reverse C.J. Goodwin. He was a receiver in college at the U. Kind of had an underwhelming career. He came to Green Bay. He started out as a receiver, but pretty quickly into his rookie year, they turned him into a corner, and he's battled some injuries. He missed, I think, all of 2017 with a shoulder injury, but a guy that has a little bit of size and can run, and they seemed impressed by his development playing corner. So I'm not saying he's going to amount to anything. We'll find out, but that's a name to keep an eye on. I think an interesting story, and looking for playmakers, guys that can attack the football. That's a former receiver, so keep that Herb Waters name in the back of your mind. Dave, where else we want to go here? I guess kind of with the Super Bowl week, and there's a lot of media personalities and a lot of interviews going on right now. Two big ex-Steelers kind of talking about their opinion on the Steelers, kind of giving their state of the Steelers. Bill Cowher was on this week on Tiki Barber's radio show and was asked about kind of how he would fix the Steelers. And do you want to give some insight on what Cowher said?
Yeah, he sure makes it sound easy.
He really did. He really did.
And one good thing, kind of teasing a little bit more. We talked to Chris Hoke later on in this show about the coaching styles of Cowher versus Mike Tomlin and all. And really, if you've heard Chris talk to us in the past, a very open, and look, he got to play really about split time underneath both coaches. So very interesting. Session with him to get his take on both the coaching styles of those two. When Cowher talked on the radio yesterday, it's kind of the things that everybody needs to sit down and behind closed doors and get an understanding of how they got to where they are now and what needs to be done moving forward. Can we move forward? Can we just be open about where we are? And once again, you use can we move forward as a part of the question that needs to be asked in that behind closed doors situation. It all sounds great in theory, and he even goes on to say, maybe it starts with me. If I'm the head coach, I allowed this to get to this point. Yes, I think everybody involved has to. If such a meeting takes place, there has to be self-reflection and an understanding that part of what each person did up until that point played a role into them getting to where they're at now. But there also has to be a true willingness to be able to get past it on the parts of all three. Mm-hmm. And you can't just give it lip service. And then, he was even asked, I think later on in the interview, and it was a great question about, how do you go about, what might happen if the same kind of things were to resurface several weeks after, such a behind the closed meeting took place between Tomlin, Roethlisberger, and Antonio Brown. He says, well, you know what? I think when you shut the door with three men that understand what's at stake, if it does resurface, you understand what the circumstances are, and I guess in so many words, what the consequences are. So he says, I think I would lay it out. Listen, it's something that shows up again. Here's what's going to happen. And me, you go back to some of my early thoughts on this, Alex, and talking about AB specifically. I said there has to be a clear line of if this happens, then this. And I am still of the firm belief that if they're able to work this out and, there's some sort of reconciliation that goes on with AB, that there has to be a firm plan. I think people will see too when we talk to Chris Hoke later on in the interview we had with him as well too. There has to be something in place that he knows that if he doesn't do this, then this is going to happen. And by this is going to happen, it means him being suspended, because the only thing, money's not going to make a difference to him, but a loss of playing time and him losing stats is one of the key things. And I think in so many words, it's one of the main things that Cowher was trying to get across was, look, a meeting between these three primaries need to happen. There needs to be an understanding or a reflection of what happened to get us to this point, and then what needs to happen to get us past this point, and what will happen if we get back to a similar situation here. So I thought it was a good good interview. I thought Cowher was as candid as could be as it relates to his coaching style and how he thinks he would handle as such.
To reference Cowher's quote and a hypothetical in a meeting with AB and Ben and the head coach, Cowher says, quote, "Listen, if it's something that shows up again, here's what's going to happen. So I think just like anything else, make sure you lay out the expectation levels that you have for everyone. Start with yourself first, and from there, moving forward, hold people accountable. You know what? Accountability, maybe it's been lost. We need to gather it back." So I think it's a good answer from Cowher. It makes a lot of sense, and it's logical, and it's probably the best way to get through this thing. But like you said, and as we mentioned, it's a lot easier said than done, especially now that it's the offseason. If this was regular season, it's probably a lot easier to fix because they're all in the same place. Right now, they're not. AB was on vacation, and everyone's kind of all over the country, and Tomlin's working on offseason stuff. So I think the missing piece to Cowher's advice is, how do you get everybody in the same room? If you get them in the same room, that's great. But how do you get that to happen? So far, it's not been easy to do.
And even if you do get them in the same room, is it just going to be? Is Antonio Brown going to want to sit in a room with Mike Tomlin and Ben Roethlisberger for 2 hours? No. Is there going to be a lot of head nodding? Yeah, I'll do this, I'll do that, as he's looking at his phone and this? Probably.
Well, I don't want to say that. I mean, I think if you go into the meeting giving everybody a voice, making sure everyone feels like they're being included, then I think AB might be engaged and be willing to talk about it. If you just scold him and say, you do this, this, and this, then I don't think that's productive.
I'm not saying that. I just don't think he's going to be, even if they give him the opportunity to be engaged, I don't think it's that high on his list on getting these things worked out.
Well, I think if you get him in the room, you can make progress. I think getting him in the room is obviously the difficult part, and AB doesn't have any interest in doing that. So I'll meet you halfway on it, I guess.
I think even if you got him in the room, there will be yeah, I'll do this, yeah, I'll do that. I've said it several times. I'm worried about him not as a player on the field moving forward. I'm worried about him as a player in that locker room, sure, and him being the diva that he is moving forward. I just don't see the Tiger changing its stripes, at this point. And regardless of what you think you might have worked out behind closed doors and however long a meeting, you damn sure better have the backside put in place to what's going to happen when it goes wrong again, because something will happen again moving forward, and how you handle that will go a long way in showing the rest of the team that what will happen if they get out of line. You got to be consistent with this with Tomlin as well too, and I guess that kind of plays into what Jerome Bettis kind of said in an interview that he had, thinking that Mike Tomlin that he's loosened up too much over the years, and in so many words, given letting those leashes on some of these veteran players get longer and longer, and I think in able to help. If AB is going to stay and help get this thing back on track on top of it, I think some of these veteran players, and not just Roethlisberger, I think, these veteran guys like Pouncey, like Cameron Hayward, they need to get out of the mode of just saying the right thing and get to doing the right thing. These guys got to start policing this locker room, in my opinion, a little bit better, and laying down the law, and help Tomlin lay down the law from that aspect. Get on these. You lead by example. So in other words, those guys better not be late for meetings unless they have, a real good excuse. On top of it, when these younger guys are late to meetings or do something that they're not supposed to do, they need to take it upon themselves to help Mike Tomlin police this. Instead of just saying all the right things when the camera's on them as a team leader, and I don't know that they're not doing this behind closed doors, but I'm just saying it needs to happen when nobody's watching.
Well, I mean, I understand and I agree, but because your whole point's been, how do you punish a guy like AB who's got the money and the fame and he feels like he's untouchable? So if you're Cam Hayward or Ramon Foster or whoever, how do you police AB? Because you said the only thing that's going to really change AB's mind or really affect him is a lack of playtime and a lack of stats. And that's not something that Hayward and Foster or any leader can dictate. So if you're one of those guys, what do you expect them to do?
I don't know. Getting in the face sure couldn't hurt.
But like you said, it's not like it's going to be effective because I'm sure Tomlin's been in his face before. I'm sure somebody's been in Brown's face before.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean,
So I'm just saying.
right. I mean, I'm not saying you toss these guys around the locker room.
I hope you're not saying that.
But there needs to be some. I think there needs to be some tense moments.
I would bet that there's been some tense moments at some point in some capacity
between players and players.
Yeah, I bet at some point.
In a locker room, you think anybody's ever gotten in AB's face and tell him he needs to come correct?
I don't know exactly in those terms, and I don't know if it's been in that public setting, and that might not be the best way to do it. But there's probably been something. I'd like to think. I don't know. I also don't know how much of a difference it would make. You know me, I'm not above confrontation. I'm aware. I'm very aware.
If I think somebody
I've seen your Twitter.
if I think somebody needs to come correct, look, I'm the same way. Family and friends and all like that. I have no problem in getting in somebody's face, even if I'm not right. Sometimes I think confrontation is the best thing to get things moving in the right direction, regardless of who might be right or wrong. But that's just me. I'm an Aries on top of that, so I'm always looking to butt heads.
You're a what? You're an Aries?
Aries, yeah.
Your sign?
Yeah, that's my sign. Yeah.
I didn't know Dave believed in.
I get into all that.
I
get into the stages of the moon and signs and how that affects people. Yeah.
Oh, I'll never look at you the same way. They need to go a Will Ferrell semi-pro, get a big sign in the locker room. Everybody love everybody. That's my movie reference. It's going to go over your head.
Yeah, like the fish that saved Pittsburgh, right?
What?
Did you ever see that movie?
No, you one-up me. I tried to one-up you with a movie reference, and you threw it back in my face.
You want to talk about signs and all like that. And you being from Pittsburgh, I mean, living in Pittsburgh all this time, you've never seen the fish that saved Pittsburgh?
No.
You like sports movies, right? You like basketball. I mean,
yeah.
Go rent that. I mean,
how old is that movie?
Oh, Lord.
Is that black and white?
No, Julius Erving was in it. Meadowlark Lemon was in it. Yeah. I mean, you're not going to be doing nothing this weekend. Go download that. I'll pay for it.
All right, I'm not working this week. I want to watch The Fish. 1979.
1979.
Oh, how about that?
Go watch that. I think Stockard Channing's in that. You know who she was from Grease and all like that. I believe
she was in it.
I believe she plays kind of the psychic. It's been years since I've seen that. But anyway,
you got it right. So you know who Stockard Channing is, which the way your mind works.
Right. The way my mind works. They align a basketball team in Pittsburgh based on all of them having the same signs and all like that. You got to watch it, Alex.
You convinced me. All right, Dave. Anything else from Bettis? I know we kind of touched on it. He just said, he felt like Tomlin has loosened up too much and it's come back to bite him, which is something I think actually Hoke kind of talks about and how the philosophy and the approach has to change. But anything else from what Bettis said that you wanted to go over?
Yeah, and look, I don't think this is the last time we're going to write or talk about. I mean, we've still got a few more days to go until the Super Bowl. It'll be interesting who else shows up on Radio Row, and I thought there were good questions asked of Cowher during the Tiki and Tierney show there of Cowher and Bettis as well too. And I have a feeling we're going to be see a few more former players and whatnot asked about the situation, the dynamic in the Steelers locker room as well too these next few days.
Dave, anything else you want to talk about before you get to the Chris Hoke interview? Anything else that was pressing? That's all I have.
Yeah, I think we can take a break here and get to the great Chris Hoke.
All right, we'll talk to Chris Hoke, and we'll be back with you guys after this.
Okay, welcome back to the Terrible Podcast, and as promised, we have a special guest on today's show, Wednesday, a couple of days to go until the Super Bowl, and it's actually a former Steelers player that's played in 3 Super Bowls. He's actually won 2. When you look at his resume on a week such as this, it really makes you wonder. be in marvel of what he accomplished during his career. And I'm, of course, talking about friend of the show, Chris Hoke. You can find Chris during the football season. He does a show on 93.7 The Fan. He also does the postgame, the Steelers postgame show on KDKA along with Bob Pompiani as well. Chris, as usual, welcome back to the Terrible Podcast. You're kind of a big deal, you know it?
I don't know about that, man, but it's always great to be on with you guys. A fan of what you do, and just really appreciate just really how you cover the Steelers.
I appreciate that, Chris. But I was thinking last night. Do you ever sit? I mean, here we come up on Super Bowl 53. I mean, you've played in 3 of these things, and you've won 2 of them. Do you ever sit back and marvel in what you in that accomplishment? Because let's face it, not a lot of people can say that you've done what you've done, and obviously you should be able to use that as ammunition against your kids, against your kids and your wife, right?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I mean, when you have 2 Super Bowl rings and you're blessed to play in 3 Super Bowls, it's what an honor and what a blessing it is, because very few men get to play in the Super Bowl. And so, you know, in my 11 years with the Steelers, to be able to play in 5 AFC Championship games and 3 Super Bowls and win 2, I just consider it a total blessing. And, you know, the times that we really reflect on it and the times that we really, sit back and marvel, to use your word, in what we accomplished is when we get together as teammates, like this past year when we got back together to celebrate Super Bowl 43, the 10 years of that Super Bowl win, and to see your teammates. There's a special relationship, Dave, that is developed throughout an NFL season. But when you go on a Super Bowl run and you go through the playoffs and then you win a Super Bowl title, there is a very, very special bond that is developed with every single teammate that you play with.
Absolutely. I can only imagine. And, once again, congratulations to you, because when you sit back and you look at this, it really is quite an accomplishment. And I think last week we saw Bryant McFadden have put out there a funny little story about the Super Bowl against the night before the Super Bowl against the Cardinals, where him and Debo and some other players stayed up till all hours of the morning playing cards and all like that, and thinking, oh, Lord, if we end up losing this game, you're never going to live this down or whatnot. Do you have any funny stories from, trips to the Super Bowl or the night before or anything along those lines you care to share?
Well, you know what? That story that B-Mac shared, I mean, that's what those guys did almost every single Saturday night, so it wasn't anything different. The great thing was it wasn't a 1 o'clock game. It was an evening game, so they had time to sleep. But, I mean, those guys were always playing cards on the plane. It was funny to watch because they would take their cards, their game they was playing, and if they were in the middle of a game on the plane, they would take that game and they'd go right into the hotel and they'd play up until meetings started and meetings got over. They were like fanatics when it came to card games, and it was fun to watch these guys get so competitive on the plane. But when I think about my time in the Super Bowl, a lot of the time, the fun time was leading up to the Super Bowl. I remember, going out with the fellas. We playing credit card roulette when we're at this, a $3,000 dinner or whatever it is, and everybody puts their credit cards in the hat. And, at that moment, you didn't care what it cost. You were just happy to be in the Super Bowl and doing things like that with your teammates. Really it's a great week to spend time with everybody and being put on the spot. I can't think of a story that's super funny, but just the experiences as a whole are ones they'll cherish for the rest of my life.
Chris, sticking with the Super Bowl, what's that week like? Obviously, we'll talk a lot about the game itself, but it's a whole event, like a week-long event with the glitz and the glamour and the media presence. What's it like for you, your first time going there, compared to your third time, which kind of reminds me of what's happening this week with the Rams, a team most guys haven't been in this situation before, juxtaposed with the Patriots, a team that this is old hat for them. So what's that experience like if you're the Rams? What's that experience like if you're the Patriots?
Well, that's a great question, Alex, because when you look at it, with the way we did it as the Steelers was that week, you had that bye week between the AFC Championship game and the Super Bowl. So that first week we came in and approached that week like a normal week. We came in on a Wednesday, we game planned. We had a good practice. Thursday, we had a good practice. Friday was our normal Friday. And then coach would usually give us Saturday, Sunday off. But the game plan was put in, and we repped the game plan on the bye week. So a lot of the work was done when we got to the Super Bowl location. And once we traveled there, either Sunday night or Monday, things really sped up. And the difference between being there, being a been there, done that guy, and being a guy who's there for the first time is this. When you're there for the first time, you want to enjoy everything. You want to be a part of all the experience, the events. You want to go to things. When it's your third time, I've done that. And you rest your body. You're more focused on really the process of preparing yourself for that game. Not to say that you don't do that when you're there for the first time, but you get caught up at times in all the different experiences and activities that are going on throughout the week. The parties at night are a big deal because you've never been there before. So some will try to get out to that. I know that my wife and I went to a concert at that first Super Bowl on one of those nights and was out till late. This is me and my wife. I wasn't with the guys, but then when you get to the second and third Super Bowl, it's like, okay, I understand this, I get this, and I'm just gonna go to bed. And so that's the difference, is really just how you engage yourself in that week of the Super Bowl.
Switching to the Steelers now, obviously there's been a lot of criticism from Mike Tomlin, obviously a disappointing year for the Steelers. One thing that I've heard talked about a lot with Tomlin and some of the critics have said is that, he's always had this mantra of players will be treated equally, but not always fairly. Ben might be treated differently than Josh Dobbs or Mason Rudolph. Is it possible, with your time in the locker room, for players to truly be treated equally top to bottom, or is fairly really the only way to do it?
You know what? This is a good question, because it's unfortunate what's going on right now down on the South Side, because there's been such a proud tradition and a proud standard that's been down there for the Steelers since I've been there. Before I was there, that was developed and created by the players in the 70s. Just right now, it seems like we're almost like the laughing stock right now of the NFL. People are looking at the Steelers and making jokes, which is not, what the chief had in mind, not what Mr. Dan Rooney had in mind, and Art definitely doesn't have in mind. So this is a tough one to swallow right now for former players to watch this go on. And when you talk about, equally versus fairly, I think that I look at it a little different. You said Coach Tomlin wants to treat everybody equally, but not fairly. In his mind, I think that fair is it's different for every person, right? For AB, treating him fairly is different than treating somebody else. It depends on what you've done for the organization. I think equally, not everybody gets treated equal, right? It all depends on your what you've done, what you've given to the team in terms of the touchdown production and yardage production and sack production. I think you're held to a different standard, and you have a longer leash or a shorter leash depending on that. And that's kind of been the way that Coach Tomlin came into this team. I was there in his first meetings. I was there when he first came in and listening to some of the things he said. And listen, let me preface this with saying that I like Coach Tomlin. I like him as a coach. I like him as a person. I think he's a really good person. I think he's a good coach. And I think at times as a coach, you try to, you have a lot of success and you have some veterans, and you try to treat your veterans like men. You don't micromanage. Some coaches micromanage and some coaches don't. Coach Tomlin does not micromanage. And so it's a matter of finding that balance of not micromanaging, but letting these men have freedom, but not too much freedom to where where they get out of control. And I think right now that balance kind of got out of whack a little bit.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I meant that he treated them fairly, not always equally. I'm going to blame it on it being 0 degrees here in Pittsburgh today for that. But Dave, go ahead.
Okay.
Chris, when you look, you played. You had the luxury of playing, 10, 11 years in the NFL. You played under both Bill Cowher and Mike Tomlin, and really kind of split the time between the two, because obviously Tomlin came in 2007, about the midway point of your career. How did the two kind of differ in their coaching styles? Obviously when you were young in your first year in the league in 2001, you probably just happened to be there, kept your nose. You probably didn't look off the narrow path too often. But what do you remember about the way Bill Cowher handled the team behind closed doors as, in relation to the way maybe Mike Tomlin in those first few years handled the team behind closed doors. And, with the late meetings and, we hear AB late for meetings and players late for meetings and all like that. Did that kind of stuff ever happen under Cowher? And if so, how did he handle that stuff? And did that stuff ever happen pre-AB in the early days of Mike Tomlin?
So the difference, I can't remember, guys, what happened. I played with Coach Cowher my first 6 years and Coach Tomlin my last 5 years. I can't remember if people came late to meetings. I know that it happens from time to time, and I'm not going to name names, but there are guys who were in the media who were calling out Coach Tomlin for not being disciplined, who was the main culprit of being late almost every single team meeting. So, it's when you look at it, you think, okay, when Coach Tomlin came in and was the head coach, he had a very heavy veteran team. He didn't, he had guys that were focused. You look at that defense, you look at some of the guys on that offense, you had guys who had wives and children at home who had been in the league, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And these guys were men. They weren't pups. And so when Coach Tomlin came in, he didn't have to worry as much about these guys because they were older. They weren't younger anymore. Then the team was really turned over. Really, the makeup of that locker room went from one of the oldest locker rooms in the NFL to one of the youngest locker rooms in the NFL. And so I think when that happens, you've got to reevaluate your approach and understand that you can't give the younger guys the same length of leash that you can give an older guy. Because they come in, they're not as mature, they're still growing, they're still trying to figure out who they are and what they're going to do with their free time and how they're going to prepare. And so you've got to clamp down a little bit. The difference between Coach Cowher and Coach Tomlin, Coach Cowher was very intense. He was very intense. Everything about him exuded intensity. Whether it was in the team meeting room, whether it was on the practice field, it was intense. Coach Tomlin was more laid back, but both those approaches still produced victories. They both have Super Bowl wins. They both have been to the playoffs. And so there's not one approach that is the successful or is the one approach that's going to win. Everybody does it differently, but those two were definitely different in the way they approached coaching, and their style was completely different.
How do you go about now if you're Mike Tomlin and Art Rooney the second and Kevin Colbert and really mostly Mike Tomlin about putting the toothpaste back into the tube at this point? Let's assume that something happens, that AB's not traded, that somehow that this is reconciled. How do you go about making sure nothing like this from Ben all the way on down? Because let's face it, I'm sure Ben probably, is the cock of the walk in the locker room, if you will. How do you go about changing or putting the toothpaste back in the tube, if you will, about making sure that none of this, gets out of control again?
Well, I think what you got to do is you've got to be honest and clear and say, here's what I've given you. I've given you guys a long leash, and you guys have taken advantage of it. You have not, lived up to what a Steeler is. And so when that happens, Coach Tomlin used to always say, one fail, all fail mentality. So one guy fails, we all fail. And I'm going to have to kind of reel you back in a little bit. And I'm not going to be able to give you the liberties and the freedom, that I gave you guys in the past. And that's because some of their teammates have taken advantage of what you've done, the liberties I've given you. And so I think that's a conversation he definitely has to have with this team, especially with a lot of young players. You need to have that conversation, and I expect him to do that. I think Coach Tomlin, he's very strong. He's a very good leader, and I know he's very very mindful of what's going on. I know that that's something that he will do. Because, when you look at it, you've got a lot of personalities in there. And if you give some more freedom than others, it lends to a little more, it'll take an advantage of that.
Yeah. But how do you discipline? How do you go about discipline disciplining grown men that make millions and millions of dollars.
Sit them down, Dave. Sit them down. Suspend them. Take away their money. Hey, here are the rules. It's like in business, right? It's goals and roles. The goal is to win a Super Bowl championship. Here's your role to get to that Super Bowl championship. Here's the expectation. The expectations are X. If you do not live up to the expectations, you will be fined. There's playbooks. There's books the NFL puts out that we can read that show the fine scales. So you say, listen, so-and-so, whoever you want it to be, here's the expectation. You'll be at this meeting on this time. We had training camp. You stay in the dorms. When we have walkthroughs, you'll be there. And if you don't, and you put, okay, it's 3 strikes, you're up. You're suspended without pay.
How would that make a guy in the middle of the roster, a guy that's making just barely above the minimum wage, that comes to practice every day and every meeting and doing his best to give it all for the team, yet he sees another guy get suspended or get sat down for a game, which would then decrease the chances of the team winning that next game? How would that make a player? I mean, you were kind of in that situation, right? I mean, a former undrafted player, a backup. How would that make you feel to see a star player sat down? Would you respect the coach even more?
Let me answer your question with a question. Would you rather your star player sat down week 10 without pay, or would you rather not do that and have your star player go AWOL in week 17 when you need him there to win a game?
That's a great point.
I mean, I would rather have my star player be sat down and suspended for a game in week 10 against the Cincinnati Bengals than I would to be in week 8 to 17 against the Cincinnati Bengals with the playoff hopes on the line. I mean, you've got to establish a bar somewhere. You've got to establish it, and if you don't do it, what you're doing, if you do not have rules, if you do not have standards that need to be met, and you don't punish people for breaking those standards, breaking those rules, you're enabling the person. The alternative is enabling someone and making them think that they're above the rules. And so, whether if it's going to hurt the team, you didn't hurt the team. That player chose through their actions. They knew the rules. So their decision is such that they chose to not play in that game. I didn't choose. You know the rules. You're the one that made the choice, so you chose that you're not going to play in this game.
But before I turn you back over to Alex here, and I'm sorry I'm rapid fire you like this, but these things, look, I'm mania bipolar. These things race through my mind. I got to get them when they fly when they fly by. And look, I don't want you to throw dirt here and all like this, but how big a role do you think Ben Roethlisberger has played in some of this? And what do you think about what he does say at times during his radio show and the way he handles his media and kind of that passive aggressiveness of his? And once again, I don't want to get you in trouble because I know you got to still get around in that locker room and all, but how much role do you think he's played in this?
Ben understands the power of his words. He knows how powerful for good and for bad, for positive and for negative. Ben knows the influence and the power of his words. And he's a very, very smart man, not only on the football field, but outside of the football field. He understands that. And so, when he wants to get his point across, he's going to do that. Ben bears as much responsibility as anybody, just like everybody on that roster. They bear responsibility for things that take place. Ben is the number one guy in that locker room, right? And with that, that you're going to, you carry a lot of weight with what you say and what you do. And so, just like any quarterback that's ever played the position in the NFL, successful quarterback, I'll be that one that's a Hall of Famer like him. There's an edge to him. There's an edge to him. You go back and talk about some of these quarterbacks, and they all have an edge to them, and that's what Ben has. Ben has an edge, and so is he responsible? I think that he would even admit that he is responsible a little bit for this if he took a step back and humbly looked at it. So I think that all the parties involved in what's taken place hold some piece of accountability.
Chris, really happy to have you on, particularly this week. We just got word that Keith Butler is going to replace Joey Porter's role as the outside linebackers coach for 2019. I know that your playing days were done by the time Butler became defensive coordinator, but do you have any insight into that Tomlin-Butler relationship as it stands today? I know you're still clued in with the team. Some people argue Butler's still just a figurehead, and it's truly Tomlin's show running this defense. Where do you come in on that?
Well, listen, I was there when Keith Butler was a linebacker coach,
right.
And I was a coaching intern, actually, the last 2 years, and then he was put the coordinator. But I know Keith Butler well, and I know what kind of coach he is, playing under him and then being part of that coaching and being a coaching intern for training camp for 2 years. And I know what he's capable of. And listen, at some point, you've got to also put the responsibility on the players.
Right.
And again, this comes back to young players and players being accountable. Is he a figurehead? And is Coach Tomlin on the defense? I think is what you were implying. I don't know the answer to that 100%. I know that what people are speculating. Right. I don't know 100% what the answer is to that question. And I don't want to know the answer to the question because I just don't want to. It's just I think a lot about both those guys as men. But I look at it, and it's unfortunate what happened with Joey. But Keith Butler coached inside linebackers and the outside linebackers before he became D coordinator. Mm-hmm. And so I think him becoming that outside linebacker coach is a great fit. He knows that position. He knows what needs to be taught. And I think that you will see, this next season, a much different defense. They're missing some spots, guys. Let's be honest. There's some spots on that defense that they need to improve, and they need to get some better talent. And I think that played a role in some of the failures that took place at times throughout the season defensively.
A lot of needs for this defense. If you had to put one position above all else, would it be corner, inside linebacker, or something else?
In my opinion, I think it's inside linebacker. You need a 3-down inside linebacker. This year they had linebackers who were very good in the run, but were not as good in the pass game. You need a Ryan Shazier-like, a Lawrence Timmons-like in his prime, a James Farrier type, who can play all 3 downs, who can play the run and the pass equally as well. I think that you saw that the pass defense the last half of the season was decent, right? If Joe Hayden can come back and play the way that he played this last year, where he can go one-on-one, and then you could double-team the other side. And then everyone talks about Darrelle Revis and how great he was. But Darrelle Revis very rarely covered the number one guy. You put Joe Hayden on the number 2 guy like they did with Darrelle Revis, and then the number 1 guy, you double-team him. Whether it's Cody Sensabaugh, whether it's somebody else, and you have a safety help over the top. I mean, that's when you can have a lot of success. So me, number 1, inside linebacker, number 2 is corner. I think you need to get a guy who can stand in there and play the run and play the pass equally as well on all 3 downs.
And that approach of putting your best corner in their number 2 and bracketing number 1 as a Patriots, right out of their playbook and what's made them so successful. So my last question for you, Chris, I'll turn it over to Dave. You were an undrafted guy in 2001. I'm sure nobody knew who you were coming to Pittsburgh from BYU. No one gave you a chance, but yet you carved out a great role and was a really important piece to the Steelers defense for a long time. What advice would you give to future undrafted free agents or future contract guys, guys that are considered long shots, camp bodies? I hate that term, camp bodies, personally, but what advice would you give to those guys that, just want to try to get their shot and make a roster?
Don't let anybody outwork you. Don't let anybody out prepare you. You can't sleep. I mean, you have to love every piece, every morsel of football. Mm-hmm. You have to love watching film. You have to love studying your playbook. You have to love preparing for practice and practicing. And you have to love the process. If you don't, you won't survive. I mean, this is coming in as an undrafted free agent. I always say as an undrafted free agent versus a draft pick every year has to, in order for them to get cut, they have to prove they can't play. They get the benefit of the doubt. As an undrafted free agent, you have to prove every year you can play. You don't get the benefit of the doubt. You come in with, that's your pedigree. You're a free agent pedigree. You're a 4th round pedigree. You're a 5th round pedigree. You're a 1st round pedigree. And so with that label and with that pedigree is the benefit of the doubt scale, right? When you're an undrafted free agent, you get very little benefit of the doubt. Mm-hmm. And so when you come in, you have to embrace it. And you can't be too hard on yourself, because you're gonna come into a practice and you're gonna get a lot of reps, and the next day, especially your rookie year, you might only get a couple. And you have to be mentally tough. But if there was one thing I would say is embrace every bit of football, embrace every aspect of the game, and run with it. Because if you don't, this game will chew you up and spit you out faster than you got there.
Chris, before I get your thoughts on the Super Bowl this coming weekend, do you think what do you think is going to happen with AB? Do you think they're going to trade him? What do you think of his actions on social media up until this point? Him still not contacting, evidently not contacting Art Rooney and the rest of the team. What's going to happen with him, and what should happen with him?
The most disappointing thing for me is that he's not communicating with Mr. Rooney. He's not communicating with Mike Tomlin and Kevin Colbert, and those are the bosses. And if you were out in the business world and your CEO called you of the company and you did not return their phone calls, what would happen, Dave?
Oh yeah, right? you get shipped out.
You get shipped out, and so to me that's the most disappointing thing, because I know Mr. Rooney, I know Kevin Colbert, I know Mike Tomlin, and I know that in their mind and what they're trying to do, they're giving everything they've got for the success of the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's the number one thing in their mind. And so they just want to figure this thing out. And so, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you whether I think Antonio Brown will be back or not. I definitely think they need to explore options and seeing what can we get back in return for Antonio Brown. The Steelers have shown that they can draft really good wide receivers outside of the first round. I mean, you can go on and on and on and on and on about all the really good receivers they've drafted outside of the first round. So, if they can get a first-round draft pick for Antonio Brown this year, and so now they have two, or they move up in the draft, why wouldn't you do it? That is a page right out of the New England Patriots playbook. Right. How many times have you seen them trade a guy? Richard Seymour comes to my mind. He was a first-round draft pick, one of the best D linemen, perennial Pro Bowler, perennial All-Pro. And they trade him for a first-round draft pick to the Oakland Raiders. And he had some good years to the Oakland Raiders, but they took that first-round draft pick and got another good player. That's what the good organizations do. So if he's not happy here and doesn't want to be here, trade him and go get that first-round draft pick and get another guy that you can that can just continue to carry on. Now, will he be at the same level as Antonio Brown, who's one of the best to ever play the game at that position? No, but I'll tell you what. When you have a quarterback like Ben, you have Antonio Brown, you have the pieces that the Steelers have, you can find they've shown they can get a good receiver on the other side that will take the pressure off Juju. And with Ben, you can still move the ball very effectively.
I'm with you there. You'd hate to lose them, but I think you can still win without them. It'll be tougher. The defense will have to play better, obviously. You have to be, have to get some turnovers or whatnot and set the offense up with a few more short fields than what they used to, but I think they could still win. So, all right, the big game this Sunday. The Patriots, obviously a more experienced team when it comes to players that have played in, a Super Bowl. The Rams not. Obviously the Tom Brady versus Jared Goff factor. How do you see this game?
Well, listen, there's no way I could ever root for or pick the New England Patriots. It just kills me to see them back in the Super Bowl again. They're so good, and everybody saw it this season how they struggled throughout the regular season. They put it all together in the playoffs. And to see the way that their defense, who struggled all year and has come out and played in the playoffs, is just unbelievable. So in my mind, they're going to find a way to slow down this Rams offense. The question in my mind is this pass rush for the Los Angeles Rams going to be able to get to Tom Brady? If you remember, when they lost to the Broncos, it was in large part because of the pass rush of Von Miller and DeMarcus Wares, right?
Right.
Tom Brady got hit play after play after play. So I think the key to this game is this. Can the Los Angeles Rams defensive front get to Tom Brady? Last week, that D Ford and Justin Houston didn't sniff him. And the offensive line played well. So I think that's the key to the game for me. If they get to him and they're able to hit him, they're able to sack him, the Rams are going to win this game. If not, Patriots are going to run away with this game.
All right. Well, Chris, when you're watching this game, take a moment to reflect on your career, because I tell you, it is quite astonishing what you were able to accomplish during your career, especially as an undrafted free agent. Being able to play in 3 Super Bowls and win 2 of them, and you're as good. Nobody deserved it more than you, because you're a down to earth, a great guy, and we certainly do always appreciate having you on the show. And just make sure to reflect on that for just a little bit when you watch that game.
I definitely will, and I appreciate the kind words. Hey, Dave and Alex, always great to come on your show, and keep up the good work.
All right, Chris Hoke, make sure you follow him on Twitter at HokeyBros76. You can listen to him on the 93.7 The Fan during the season on that show, and also listen to him the post-game show on KDKA with Bob Pompiani as well. Chris, once again, thanks for coming on the Terrible Podcast. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Chris.
All right, guys. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, Dave. Good interview with Chris Hoke. Man, it's always good to have Hokey on. And in the Super Bowl week, his insight is so valuable as somebody we talked about, during the interview before the show, to played in 3 Super Bowls, to won 2 of them. I just don't think you can get that anywhere else. And so really thankful to have him on. He's always good to talk to, and appreciative of him taking the time to talk to us too.
Yeah, he's always so, he's so very down to earth. And plus, I think the plus of getting a guy like him is, like I said, he played under both head coaches, both under Cowher and Tomlin, and it's interesting the way his career was really split between those 2 coaches. So he got to see Tomlin progress as a head coach, and then obviously got to be there in the latter years of the time that Bill Cowher was there too. So Chris Hoke's always been one of my favorites. Boy, you want to talk about a guy to root for? It was Chris Hoke during his time in Pittsburgh, an undrafted free agent, and he's proof that you always say there's no such thing as how do you term it when it comes to undrafted guys?
No camp bodies.
Yeah, the camp bodies. Chris Hoke coming out of BYU, that was a classic case where you thought there's no way that guy's going to make the roster, and he ended up playing as long as he did in the NFL. Is really a testament to that. So always great to have. And hey, look, if you listen to the show, there's no way that you're not following Chris Hoke on Twitter. But if you're not, HokeyBros76 on Twitter. Reach out to him and thank him for coming on the show today. I know he always likes to hear from listeners of the show as well.
All right, Dave. One other thing I want to talk about before we get into some reader emails and close out the show. I posted my Senior Bowl mock draft today, and obviously I wasn't at Mobile this year, so I was debating if I should do it or not. But just for fun, to kind of get the mock draft idea going, just to kind of go through it quickly. In round 1, I went with the corner from Penn State, Amani, and I'm trying to pronounce the last name correctly here with the help of the pronunciation guide, Ruwarie, I think. Hopefully I'll figure it out. But either way, the corner from Penn State, kind of a big, long press corner. I think can play the football well, a local guy. So that's kind of where I went with the start. In the second round, I went with Jermaine Pratt, the inside linebacker, NC State. Might be a round too high, but obviously the position right up there with corner is a big need. So I think he could start day one next to Vince Williams.
Do you think he's a legitimate? What can he do and what are his weaknesses? What really do you like that Pratt does, and what scares you the most about him?
Well, I'm going a lot off of, I think it was Josh Carney that did the draft profile on him, so I deferred to him a lot in the report on Jermaine Pratt. But I like the versatility. I like that he kind of was a well-rounded guy, a guy that had sacks, a guy that had interceptions, forced fumble, pass deflections, a guy that's probably still figuring out the position a little bit as a one-year starter, so I think there's a higher ceiling there. Josh talked about kind of how strong he is and how explosive he is, and I think he's, you kind of see him figuring stuff out and in the run and pass game. So is there work to be done there? Sure. But a guy that, came in NC State as a safety and switched to linebacker, and I think we're seeing this hybrid, defense, and we're seeing this team play some 3-3-5 and trying to find guys that have that versatility. So I think that's what attracted me most to Jermaine Pratt.
Do you think he's going to be kind of a workout demon at the combine? You think he's going to have some good numbers?
Well, I think if you're a safety return linebacker, you're kind of leaning towards being a guy that can put up numbers. So we'll see for sure. A lot of it depends on how these guys train, because things like the 40-yard dash, that's not a natural football move coming out of a track stance like that. So it's really about how well you train, who your trainer is, and how comfortable you are doing that kind of stuff. So it can be tough to gauge sometimes. That's how you get that workout warrior guys that are really good at it in terms of the training aspect. Maybe don't translate to the football field. But I think we'll test reasonably well. I'll answer it that way.
All right.
To go through the rest of the mock, round 3, a guy we talked about a lot, Terry McLaurin from Ohio State. Now, my concern with him is that I kind of feel like he's a Z-type receiver, and this team, let's assume you trade AB, you want an X-type of receiver. So there's a little bit of concern there, but obviously a vertical threat and a big playmaker, and that's kind of fits the mold of what the Steelers have drafted historically at the position under Tomlin and Colbert. Round 4, I went Dalen Mack, the nose tackle from Texas A&M, who I talked about during the week. I thought he had a really solid week at Mobile. Watched him some more, and he's a guy with a really interesting background. He was a fullback running back in high school at 300 pounds, and it just speaks to, I think, some unusual athleticism he has at the position. Round 6, I went with a guy I don't really know anything about, but I just want, someone that can be a playmaker in that secondary. Juan Thornhill from Virginia, 13 career interceptions, and a guy that looks like a day 3 candidate, so I thought just taking somebody that has that background, that skill set the way they did. Gerard Holloman, although I thought that was a terrible pick, but I know why they did it, the way they took Senquez Golson, a guy that had, 10 interceptions, I think, his final year at Ole Miss, so I think you're trying to go with that frame of mind. The other 6th-round pick, Tony Pollard from Memphis, I think is really interesting. They drafted Jalen Samuels last year, who was a running back and a receiver. Pollard was kind of the same, but he also has the kick return value. Holds the NCAA record with 7 career kick return touchdowns for Memphis, so I kind of like him. I thought he played well in the Senior Bowl as well. And then to round things out, in round 7, Tommy Sweeney, just kind of your throwaway tight end pick who could be at that number 3. Even if Grimble comes back, you don't want to guarantee a roster spot for Xavier Grimble.
Boy, if anybody has their pulse on what's going on in Memphis, it's who?
Yeah, it's Randy Fichtner. It's his team.
So maybe that's a guy we need to dig into a little bit more as we get into the into the offs. I know absolutely, other than just a little bit at the Senior Bowl, I know absolutely nothing about most of these guys from really round 4 on. I still got a lot of homework to do on them. One of the tight ends that was at the Senior Bowl that the Steelers reportedly had met with, that we've talked a little bit about so far, is Foster Moreau. I dug into his tape quite extensively the last few days, and in fact, I did a complete contextualization of his 2018 catches, which I believe there were like 22 of them. I think if you watch every one of those, you'll get a real good idea about what his upside is as a pass catcher. He really is more of a possession type tight end. He's not going to be a guy, I think, that, he's not a Gronk, he's not a Kelsey, not a I don't know, what's another one, Gerald Everett. He's not that kind of guy, but he is a guy that will be able to block for you well. So he is kind of that number 2 to number 3 tight end, if you will. He is a guy that should be able to play some on special teams for you as well. So if you want to look at those 22 receptions, it'll probably take you about 10 minutes to go through all of them. It'll give you a good idea of what he is as a pass catcher. And later on throughout this process, we'll give you a more complete draft profile of him, the way he is, especially line up on the line of scrimmage as a blocker, which I thought he did an admirable job in that area. He's definitely a guy, I think, that the Steelers could target in the much later rounds as a guy to maybe serve in that Xavier Grimble role this year.
Yeah, very much a Steelers type pick at tight end, the way I think Tommy Sweeney is as well. One last thing I wanted to mention before we get to the reader emails. Just a fun article I posted today for Steelers Depot. Kind of had fun researching it. Because it is so cold in Pittsburgh today, I wanted to think about what was the coldest game the Steelers have ever played in, and it came in 1977 at Cincinnati, and that old AstroTurf baseball field basically is what they played in. So I won't go into all the details here. It's too hard to explain in a podcast format, but a fun article there if you want to check out just a really miserable game in both result and in temperature. Dave, let's get to some reader emails, and what do we have there today?
Let's see. We have one from Ron here. and I won't use his last name because he started off the email properly. He says, don't use my last name. But Rod says, great job as always. Could you explain some outside linebacker terms used on the show? What is bend and what is setting the edge?
You want to take this, Dave, or you want me to talk about it?
Go ahead.
Bend is just basically the linebacker's ability to turn the corner. I mean, we talk about bend. We talk about, can a linebacker be able to dip under and past the tackle, flatten, and get to the quarterback? If you don't have bend, you'll kind of see what happened with Jarvis Jones. Guys that get run upfield, they can't turn the corner, and they're nowhere near the quarterback. If you want to look at bend, look at someone like Von Miller, somebody that's able to get under the tackle, kind of get skinny, and have that hip and ankle flexibility and flexion to turn the corner, steer himself to the quarterback instead of getting steered upfield. So that's kind of the term that you look at. Just basically, how effectively can you turn that corner, where that junction point of where the tackle set meets the quarterback's drop, and get to the quarterback. If you have good bend, you get past that tackle and you're able to win that rep and get pressure and get sacks. If you don't have bend, you're going to be 10 yards upfield and nowhere near the play. Setting the edge is just basically being the force defender in the run game. You have run fits and run responsibilities. Every player has it. If you're a linebacker, often you're going to be the force player. Setting the edge means keeping the back inside. So if the running back wants to try to bounce things outside, you're going to be setting that edge to keep him inside and force him to your help. You want to force these guys inside so they can't get in space. They can't get away from the rest of your defense and the rest of your help. So we talk about setting the edge, usually matched up on a tackle or a tight end, staying wide, being that farthest outside player and not letting the back get wider than you and forcing him to bounce it back inside. So that's setting the edge.
Just look at the ankle flex sometimes on some of these guys. One good thing to do, and if you get even if you don't get the all 22 view on some of these college games, if you watch some of the replays of some of the pass rushing from the edge rushers or whatnot, hit the YouTube slow down portion of that and watch the kind of the ankle flexion and the actual bend. I mean, it really is. You'll see the bend of these guys turning the corner there, and you look at some of these 3-cone times or whatnot. Those are good reflections during the combine. And look, you can't put everything on the underwear Olympics and the times, but it will definitely point out areas for you to go back and reanalyze again. And I think that's one of the great things about having the combine and a full set of numbers on these players is be able to notice, okay, well maybe I didn't see the long speed here on a player, or maybe I didn't see the athleticism that some of these numbers showed. Let me go back to the tape and see some of that stuff. So, I mean, it's a fair question for sure. Josh Karadima writes in, hey, guys, you talk about how the media in Pittsburgh asks the same questions to the same people, so I'll propose this. If you could ask one current player, coach, front office staff one question, what would your question be, or who would it be for? Yeah, that's such a... It's a loaded question because here we are. I mean, on the spot type question. But I tell you one thing, when I read your email, Josh, that immediately popped in my mind, and it kind of comes on the heels of us talking to Chris Hoke today. Ask some of the harder questions. Like if I had Mike Tomlin, I would ask Mike Tomlin, how does he, based on kind of the things that just happened or what just came out of Jerome Bettis' mouth, how does he feel he's progressed as a coach in the locker room since 2007? Does he feel like he's maybe loosened up a little bit too much over the years? Does he feel maybe that he's provided some of these veteran players too long of a leash? Is that a reason why things maybe have gotten to the way they are now with AB? That would I get the kind of answer that I'm looking for, or a forthright answer? Probably not. But those are the kind of questions I think I would ask.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and be a tough question, and to be curious to see how Tomlin answers it. I don't believe you'd get a great answer from what you're looking for, but I think it'd be an interesting question just to throw it out there. I'm obviously very interested in the Butler-Tomlin dynamic. I asked Chris Hoke about it today, and I probably wouldn't ask Tomlin that question because I don't think I'd get an answer. I wouldn't ask Butler because I wouldn't get an answer. I'd ask some players. I'd be interested to see how it actually works on game days and how that relationship functions. I just like asking the actual kind of meat and potatoes football questions, instead of the, broad stuff that like some of these questions get asked, Tomlin's already coming with a cliche. Like anytime a question's about compare this team to your previous teams, Tomlin's going to give you the same answer of I don't think about that stuff. And I don't believe that he does think about that stuff in the first place. I believe that's an honest answer. So I would just ask some really football-pointed questions, especially because, even Bill Belichick does a football show where he breaks down the tape, he talks about players, and it's really, really cool to check out. I know you posted clips of it, Dave, and it's a really interesting kind of behind-the-veil look at it. Tomlin doesn't do that stuff. So really in his press conferences, the only time to talk about real football questions, real X's and O's stuff. So that'd be my mindset every week, is to ask a real pointed football-related question.
And as cold as Belichick is portrayed, and with good reason, because during his press conference, are absolutely brutal to watch sometimes. You get uncomfortable watching them sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
But on the flip side, those film sessions that he has during the season with who is it, Scott Zolak?
I don't know who does it.
Is who he does it with. They are you will learn something in those things.
Mm-hmm.
And he really is forthcoming in things either his team did wrong or things that the other team did wrong that enabled a play to work or not work in certain situations. So, yeah, I would like to see Tomlin be a little – look, people do things wrong. It's okay, in my opinion, to say that that player X did something wrong. To me, it's not so much throwing somebody underneath the bus, but you could say, there's tactful ways to be able to do that. It would be nice to see Mike Tomlin or Keith Butler, for that matter, do more X's and O's stuff.
And I don't even believe it's throwing guys under the bus, because I assume that stuff's already been addressed during the week in film room, on Tuesday and Wednesday. So I don't think that'd be any new information to the player. So I don't think it would be thrown under the bus.
All right, from Aaron Binion. Hey guys, love the show. Been listening for a while. Gets me through the day. My first question is, what do you think if the Rams don't resign Ndamukong Suh or Aqib Talib about going after them in free agent? I don't think about that because both guys just don't scream free agents that the Steelers would go after with the kind of the, I don't know, I don't want to say checkered past, but the kind of the background, the character makeup of both those guys just does not scream what the Steelers go after. So I don't really think about that, Aaron. Also, he says he grew up in L.A. and never had a football team growing up, so it's pretty weird having one. His friend is a Broncos fan, decided to pick the Rams as their NFC team. I can't help but feel weird cheering on the Rams in my black and gold myself. What are your thoughts? Yes, I'm pretty young. He's born in 92. Sorry to make you guys feel old. Probably don't make Alex feel so old.
So young.
He says his first jersey was Troy Polamalu. Oh, wow. Best wish. Keep up the good work. Look, I live in Vegas now. I've never lived in a city where there was an NFL team. I've never lived in a city where there was a professional team, period. I lived in Pensacola and Savannah, Georgia. And Savannah, for years, had a minor league team, baseball team. Pensacola, they had minor league hockey and now obviously baseball there with the Barracudas. And also with the Raiders coming to Vegas here in a couple of years, it really is going to be something to watch. I'm not going to. I'll go to a hockey game, Vegas Golden Knights game, well before I will a Raiders game.
Yeah, well, you're getting that football team in a couple of years, so you can call yourself someone that's been in a professional environment.
Right, but I don't think it's going to change the way. I'm not going to have any different feeling about it, though. I'm still going to watch games from home and that kind of thing. So thanks for writing in, Aaron. Let's see what else we have here. From Mark Long, I think if Tomlin does not get the locker room in order this year and the team does not make the playoffs in 2019, he is toast. Okay. I think it'd have to be, if they don't make the playoff, look, I've already said this a few times. I think it's somewhat of a hot seat year for Tomlin, but I think they would really have to be a bad team. I think just 500 and not making the playoffs would be enough for Tomlin to be out of a job. I think it would have to be really, really bad in 2019. But I'm not disputing the fact that in 2019 needs to be, better than it was, 2018. Thoughts?
I disagree with the idea that an 8-8 year in missed playoffs would still mean Tomlin stays. Could he stay? Sure, but I could see a scenario where it's missed playoffs and it's not a 4-12 year, but it's still 8-8 and disappointing, 9-7 and still disappointing. You miss the playoffs and he's out. I've always outlined that I didn't think Tomlin was going to get fired at the end of this year, nor should he have been. And the way that it may happen is if it goes the Mike McCarthy route. If it took McCarthy a second year of underachieving and poor play. Now, I know the Packers were really bad this year, but I could still see a disappointing year for Tomlin, 8-8, because the standard is to not go 8-8 or 9-7 or to keep the streak of non-losing seasons alive. The standard is to make the playoffs, win the AFC North, and win the Super Bowl. And if they fall short of that entirely again, then I think that becomes a serious conversation.
We've gotten, and as always has probably been this in Pittsburgh anyway, it's very reactionary. It's either pass or fail, win the Super Bowl or don't. If he doesn't a couple years in a row, fire him, get him out of there. If he does, okay, kind of thing. I understand, people being down on Tomlin. But like I said, I think it really has to be a lot worse than 8-8 for him to lose his job. Now, if you go 8-8, 7-9 in 2019, and then you turn around in 2020 and have another, missed playoff year, then you're probably going to see a move, especially too coming up on the end of his contract. Let's assume that his contract does not get extended later on this season. But look, I think it would take a little bit more than just going 8-8 for him to lose his job. Mark also writes in, he says, got a trade proposal for AB. Trade AB to the 49ers. Give them the Steelers' 20th first-round pick. Steelers get their second-round first-round pick plus a player. All sounds great in theory, but I wrote this on Twitter yesterday, Mark. John Lynch seems like John Lynch, obviously former NFL player. In fact, played on Tampa and played under Mike Tomlin for a little bit there. He just comes off as a very level-headed kind of guy, and that's why I'm surprised they drafted a guy like Reuben Foster. I think they may have learned from the error of their ways in with that pick and all like that. I don't view John Lynch as a guy, personally, maybe you feel different, Alex, as a guy that's willing to go after a guy like Antonio Brown because of the baggage and everything that might come along with him. And coming along with him would be that great play, but he is over 30 now. To me, he does not come off of it as a GM willing to go that route.
I wouldn't say that. I don't know about that. I guess I'll put it that way. I will remain relatively neutral. I think anytime you're in San Francisco, you're playing the organization that has the greatest receiver of all time that helped you win Super Bowls and win so many games. I think that you understand the value of it. Now, obviously, Rice and his attitude was a lot different than AB, but I wouldn't discount it. I think there's a chance that Lynch would take a chance and take that opportunity to get a guy like Antonio Brown. What was the trade proposal? Was that for the 49ers first-round pick or the second-round pick?
I think what he's saying is trade, swap first-round picks, and then plus a player for the Steelers. Sort of along lines like a Goodwin or something like that,
I think with San Francisco, I'll say this, is that of all the trade scenarios I've heard, I think, and not league-wide, not just San Francisco, but I think the one that made the most sense to me was getting the 49ers 34th overall pick, whatever their top second rounder is. That would feel the most realistic to me.
It's quite a lot.
Plus something else probably, but that's where I think that's the big piece. Just 34th plus like a third or a fourth and something else maybe next year.
Let me tell you, if they did manage to go up and somehow get that second round pick, I would auction that thing off for. I would go
the
back.
The second round or the second overall?
The second overall, I mean.
Oh yeah.
If you ended up with that, I wouldn't stay there. I would try to get more. I would try to pull Belichick in this. Try to get as many, because let's face it, they could use a lot of different young players early in this draft, especially on a defensive side of football. So I don't think. I mean, I know the tendency would be there to get maybe a Bosa or who else probably going to go top.
Josh Allen.
Yeah, top couple picks in there, but I think I would take that second overall pick and turn it into other picks, and try to fill multiple holes. But that's just me. All right, Dino Santos writes in. Also, Dino, greetings from Manila, Philippines. How about that,
Wow.
Alex? That's always
Awesome.
a fun part of doing this podcast, is finding out from all the different geographic locations where people listen to this show. So, Dino, thank you for writing in. He writes in, been listening to the podcast since I discovered the Steelers Depot website about 5 years ago. Let's see how you track Tomlin and Colbert's pro day. He likes how we track their whereabouts, and of course the prospects. Keep it up, more power. Let's see. Okay, almost forgot the question. Here it goes. How do you find the idea of Pittsburgh selecting Noah Fant in the first round? He says he had this thought brewing ever since the AB drama started. In case we do decide to move on from AB, do you think it's feasible to pick Fant and do more 12 personnel packages, Fant and Vance combo, and focus more on the run with Connor and Samuels?
I mean, I'm not going to rule out anything, especially here on January 30th, but to go tight end in the first, even if you lose Jesse, I get the idea, do you want to go bigger and kind of counter the way the NFL is going? But as long as you have Ben, you're going to be a passing team, you're going to be an 11 personnel kind of team. I just don't see enough of a value in going tight end in the first round. Am I going to rule out entirely? No, I think Fant's a good player. I'm excited to check him out more, but the odds of that are pretty remote.
Yeah, I would think so too. I mean, I'm never going to say never, though. I mean, Kevin Colbert's going to get up there when he gets at the combine and the pre-draft press conference, and he's going to say, worst thing that we can do is not draft, is to bypass a good player. We'll be kicking ourselves for years if we bypass a player just because of position. I'm tired. I don't want an offensive player in the first round this year. I don't.
Not even a receiver if they trade AB?
Yeah, I mean, I could swallow that a little bit easier, but
okay,
man, I want to see the defense addressed quite a few times. I understand now if you could get obviously one of the top receiver like a Debo Samuel or something along those lines. I mean, it would obviously be hard to bypass, especially if you lost a player like AB. But man, I'm going to be disappointed if it's a guard or a center or a tackle or God forbid a running back. My own wants are not offense. I'll put it to you that way. All right, yeah, Dino, thanks for writing in there. Let's see. Joe Watts writes in. He had the same jersey from Sears. I guess commenting on what I said the other day about the first jersey that I had there. Let's see. One other one here from Ivan Kataroch. Hi guys, I'm a huge Steelers fan since 1984. He lives in the UK. UK. He lives in Kentucky. Is that right?
Wildcats, I'm sure that's what he's saying.
Yeah, and regularly listen to the podcast to stay up to date. Do you think there would be any way we could broker a deal with the 49ers swapping their number 2 pick for AB, then trade down with someone like the Lions, Bills, Broncos for their number 1 and number 3 this year to get an extra pick, and then use our number 1 on a guy like Polite Ferguson or Devin White? Say that first time. He goes on. Ivan Kataroch. Did I say it right, Ivan? He says, say that one first time, Dave. Hopefully I got that right, Ivan. Let me know. Look, I think you just put, from your email to God's ears. If they somehow manage to get the number 2 overall pick from the 49ers, then get back busy trading back down again to load up their picks. I'm never going to say never, because the moment I say something's not going to happen, i.e., They'll never trade. They'll never find anybody to trade Martavis Bryant. And even if they do, I didn't even believe they're going to get a third-round pick. There's no way that Landry Jones will not be on this roster this year as the number 2 quarterback. Those kind of things get you in trouble when you speak in absolutes that way. So I'll put it to you this way. I'll be surprised they manage to get the number 2 overall pick, but if they do, I hope they rearrange it and move back down.
Agreed.
All right, I think that's got enough of that right now. We'll get, once again, thank you to Chris Hoke for coming on the podcast today. We hope you enjoyed that interview. Make sure you hop on the Twitter machine and thank him for spending about 30 minutes with us there. Friday's show, going to be a lot about the Super Bowl. Hopefully that's all we have to really talk about, previewing the Super Bowl, and maybe we'll go over a few prop bets and things related to that. In the meantime, follow me on Twitter at Steelers Depot. You can follow Alex on Twitter at Alex_Kozora. You can follow the show at Terrible Podcast. You can email the show, theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. Send us a few questions for the Friday show, if you will. And Alex, I think that has it. Until Friday, as always, thanks for listening to the Terrible Podcast with Dave and Alex.